get that feeling?
Hmm.
Like there's this whole other world right under our noses, but totally hidden.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, get ready because today we're diving deep, and I mean deep, into that hidden world, specifically white-collar crime in Israel.
Ooh, intriguing.
Right. And to guide us through this labyrinth, we've got the ultimate insider, top Israeli lawyer, Jack Henn.
Now, he's someone who really knows the ins and outs of this world.
He really does. We're diving into his latest lecture, which is basically a masterclass in what makes white-collar crime tick in Israel.
And it's fascinating stuff because it's not just about, following the money.
Right. It's about understanding the whole context.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
culture, the economy, the unique pressures that are almost like, well, Henn uses this phrase, venture capitalism on steroids.
Cool. I love that. Venture capitalism on steroids.
All right, so get this. Picture this. You're a small business owner in Israel, just trying to, make a living, do things by the book. Suddenly, your bank accounts are frozen. Assets. Gone. And it's all because of this legal tool that's supposed to be used against, like, I don't know, organized crime kingpins, not everyday entrepreneurs like yourself.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark scenario.
It is. And this is the world that Jack Henn is really digging into. We're going deep with him today, unpacking how something meant for justice, keeping people safe, could actually be used, well, unfairly.
It's something that resonates even outside of Israel's borders, too, I mean, this whole issue of economic enforcement. How do we fight crime effectively but still make sure we're protecting individual rights? That's a tough thing to balance, a real tightrope walk for democracies everywhere.
So let's break this down a little. Let's start with, well, what exactly are these temporary property seizures? Sounds kind of like something out of a movie, right?
Right. So, in the simplest terms, it basically lets authorities hit the pause button on assets if they even just think those assets are linked to illegal activities.
Okay, makes sense.
The whole point is to stop criminals from actually profiting from their crimes, especially while the case is still going on.
Oh, so if you bust a huge drug smuggling operation, you don't want them using their, what they call it, their ill-gotten gains to just keep things running from their prison cell.
Exactly. That's the idea. And it makes sense, doesn't it? Disrupt their money flow, make it harder for them to operate, and hopefully stop them from causing more harm down the line. It's not just an Israeli thing either. Tons of countries use this tactic.
Okay, so at first glance, it seems like, I don't know, a necessary evil, fighting fire with fire, especially when we're talking about serious, large-scale, organized crime. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, Henn's argument, it hinges on this. He's saying that in Israel, this tool, right, this tool designed for these big-time criminals, these massive drug operations, Henn's argument is that instead of those big, complex criminal cases, like we were talking about, it's now being used more and more in cases of, well, white-collar crime. Stuff like tax evasion, maybe some questionable business practices, even just breaking regulations.
Right. And those are definitely things that need to be addressed. No one's arguing that. But Henn's point is more about, I guess you could say, making sure the punishment fits the crime and, thinking about the unintended consequences.
Because let's be real, freezing someone's assets, even for a little bit, even if it's temporary, can be absolutely devastating. I mean, it can wreck their lives, their businesses, everything. And, well, you're the one who wanted to deep dive into Henn's work, so I know this whole concept of fairness is right up your alley.
It is, and it's interesting. Henn doesn't just raise the issue and leave it at that.
Right.
He points to this report. It's from the Israeli state controller back in 2020, and they found this huge difference, a huge gap between the initial value of the assets that get frozen and what people actually end up forfeiting after a trial.
Wait, seriously, how big of a difference are we talking about here?
Huge. We're talking hundreds of percentage points off in some cases. It's not insignificant at all.
But by then, it's too late. Your business could be gone, your reputation in tatters. Like you said, the damage is already done.
And that's exactly where that question of fairness comes in. Was it even right to freeze those assets in the first place? Were the consequences, even if they weren't intentional, were they really proportionate to what the person was actually accused of doing? These are the tough questions Henn wants us to think about.
It's tough to hear those stories, to think about those consequences, especially for folks who might be totally innocent in the end. But that's what I appreciate about Henn. He doesn't just, point out the problems and walk away. He actually has ideas, solutions, like a true problem solver.
He does, and his proposals are interesting. Practical, but also make you think. Basically, he's saying that if this legal tool is powerful enough to, destroy someone's life,
Right.
then we better make sure it's being aimed at the right people, right? And that we're being, I don't know, more precise with it, not just swinging it around like a sledgehammer.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. So what does that look like? Being more precise, I mean.
So his first suggestion is to get back to basics. He says reserve these temporary property seizures for the big stuff. Organized crime, terrorism, threats to national security. The kind of situations where the potential for harm is, well, enormous.
So going after the real bad guys, the ones that are in immediate danger. But what about the white-collar crimes we talked about? The tax evasion, those still need to be dealt with.
Right, and Hen agrees, absolutely. But he says in those cases, it should be all about proportionality. Like, if they decide a temporary seizure is totally unavoidable, then at least make sure the value of what's being frozen is actually in line with the crime itself and with what they could realistically expect to seize at the very end. No more just taking everything just in case.
So no more, like, freezing a shop owner's entire life savings over a minor tax thing.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance, making sure the punishment, or in this case, the pretrial action, it matches what the person is actually accused of. Yeah. But he goes even further. He has this idea for a centralized database.
A database. Not exactly my area of expertise, but I'm all ears.
Basically, it would track every single temporary property seizure and what ends up happening.
Okay.
So how much was frozen initially? What were the exact charges? What was the final forfeiture amount, if any? That kind of transparency, well, it would keep law enforcement accountable, but it would also help spot any patterns of, maybe seizures that were way out of line.
So a way to see if the system's actually working the way it should be or if it's being misused.
Exactly. Shine a light on it, and that encourages a more just system.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Hen's work, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
I think what Hen reminds us is that even when we create tools to keep everyone safe, we can't forget about fairness. Just because we're trying to catch criminals doesn't mean we abandon our principles. It's about upholding the rights of all citizens every step of the way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And for everyone listening, if this deep dive got you thinking, maybe it's time to take a look at how things work where you are. How do we, as a society, fight crime effectively, but do it fairly? It's a big question, a complex one for sure, but definitely worth asking. Until next time, stay curious.